The life left behind. Anna stood at the edge of the bustling port, her heart pounding as she gazed at the massive cruise ship that loomed in the distance. Its sleek, pristine exterior gleamed under the morning sun, a stark contrast to the life she had led for the past 9 years. She tugged at the collar of her maid's uniform, the crisp fabric unfamiliar against her skin, and took a deep breath. This was her chance, her only chance, to finally get out from under the crushing weight of debt that had suffocated her for so long. It hadn't always been this way. Once, Anna had lived a life filled with promise and hope. She had been a young woman, married to a man she thought she knew, with dreams of building a family and a future together. John Martinez had been everything to her, charming, ambitious, and full of life. They lived in a modest house in the suburbs, nothing grand, but it was theirs. Together, they had made plans for their future, talked about children, and spent quiet evenings imagining the life they would build. But life, as it often does, took a cruel turn. 9 years ago, John had disappeared. It started like any other day. He kissed her goodbye, promising to be home in time for dinner. Anna had smiled and waved as he drove off, thinking nothing of it. But that night, he never returned. Days passed, then weeks, and still no sign of John. The authorities told her they believed he had been in a terrible accident. His car had been found submerged in the river, but no body was ever recovered. They assured her he was gone, swept away by the strong currents, lost forever. Anna had been devastated. Pregnant with twins, she had no idea how she would survive without him. Grief-stricken, she clung to the hope that somehow, some way, John would come back. But as the weeks turned into months and the debt collectors began knocking at her door, she realized she was on her own. It wasn't just the loss of John that crushed her, it was the burden he had left behind. Unbeknownst to her, John had been deeply in debt, entangled in financial troubles that he had hidden from her. When he disappeared, so did any hope of resolving the debts. The lenders, impatient and unforgiving, turned their sights on Anna, demanding she pay what her husband had owed. She had struggled, taking on any job she could find, cleaning houses, waiting tables, working late-night shifts at local diners. All the while, she raised her twins, Diego and Lucia, trying to shield them from the harsh reality of their lives. Every day was a battle just to survive, to put food on the table and keep a roof over their heads. But no matter how hard she worked, the debts never seemed to shrink. If anything, they grew larger, more insurmountable. Anna had reached her breaking point many times over the years, but she had never given up. Not when the threats from the lenders became more sinister, and not when her body screamed for rest. She couldn't afford to stop. She had children depending on her, and she refused to let them down. Now, standing at the edge of this new opportunity, Anna felt a mixture of hope and dread. The job on the cruise ship had come as a last-minute stroke of luck. The pay was good, better than anything she could find back home, and it would allow her to save enough to finally clear her debts. It meant being away from her children for weeks at a time, something that tore at her heart, but she had no choice. This was her one shot at freedom. She had arranged for Donna Carmen, a kind elderly neighbor who had always looked after Diego and Lucia when Anna worked long shifts, to care for them while she was gone. The twins, now 9 years old, had clung to her tightly when she told them she would be leaving for a while. They didn't fully understand why, but they knew their mother was doing everything she could to make life better for them. "I'll be back soon," she had promised, kneeling in front of them as they blinked back tears. "And when I come back, things will be different. We'll be free." As the final boarding call echoed across the port, Anna squared her shoulders and walked toward the ship, her steps heavy with the weight of the past. The luxury cruise ship was a floating palace, filled with wealthy passengers enjoying a life of ease and indulgence, worlds apart from the life Anna had known. As she made her way on board, she couldn't help but feel out of place. But she reminded herself that this was temporary, a means to an end. The first few days on the ship were grueling. The work was hard, long hours spent cleaning cabins, serving guests, and ensuring that every detail was perfect. Her body ached from the physical strain, but she pushed through, keeping her mind focused on the goal, paying off the debt and returning to her children. Each night, she collapsed into her small bunk, exhausted but determined. It wasn't until the fourth day, while she was cleaning the VIP lounge, that her world shifted in a way she could never have imagined. Anna had been wiping down a marble table, her thoughts drifting to Diego and Lucia, when she heard a familiar voice. Her heart skipped a beat, the voice pulling her from her reverie. She turned slowly, her breath catching in her throat as her eyes locked on a figure sitting just a few feet away. It was John. For a moment, she stood frozen, unable to comprehend what she was seeing. The man sitting at the table, casually sipping champagne and laughing with a group of wealthy passengers, was her husband, the man she had mourned, the man she had believed was dead for nearly a decade. He looked different, more polished, more confident, dressed in an expensive suit with his hair carefully styled. But it was him. There was no doubt in her mind. Anna's heart pounded in her chest as she struggled to process the impossible reality before her. John was alive. He had been alive all this time, living a life of luxury while she had scraped and struggled just to survive. Fury, confusion, and disbelief swirled inside her as she stood there, gripping the cleaning cloth so tightly her knuckles turned white. She wanted to march up to him, to scream, to demand answers. But she couldn't. Not here, not in front of all these people. Instead, she backed away slowly, her mind racing, her heart aching with 1,000 unanswered questions. How could this be? How could he have left her, left their children, to fend for themselves? And why hadn't he come back? Anna hurried back to her small cabin, her pulse racing, her thoughts spiraling out of control. She couldn't believe what she had seen. John, her John, was alive. He had faked his death, abandoned her and their children, and built a new life for himself. A life filled with wealth and privilege, while she had been left to pick up the pieces. As she sat on the edge of her narrow bed, staring blankly at the wall, one thing became clear. She needed to confront him. She needed answers. But more than anything, Anna realized, she needed justice. A confrontation long overdue. Anna spent the rest of that evening in her tiny cabin, her heart still pounding from the revelation that her husband, Jean, was not only alive but living a life she never could have imagined. How could someone she had loved so deeply, someone she had trusted with her entire heart, turn out to be capable of such deception? It wasn't just that he had faked his death. It was the cold, calculated decision to leave her and their children in the wreckage of his disappearance, drowning in debt and grief while he thrived elsewhere. The fury that had simmered inside her since that moment in the VIP lounge now boiled over. She paced the small room, her mind racing with 1,000 questions. Why had he left? What could possibly justify abandoning his family? And who was the woman she had seen sitting beside him, laughing and sharing in the luxurious life that should have been theirs? There was no way Anna could ignore this. Confronting John was the only option. She had spent years suffering in silence, scraping by to make ends meet. She had done it for her children, for the promise of a better future, but she had also done it because John had promised her a life they never got to live. Now, she needed answers. And more than that, she needed him to face the consequences of what he had done. That night, Anna barely slept. The shock of seeing John alive, paired with the burning anger and hurt that gnawed at her, kept her tossing and turning on the hard, narrow bed. Her mind replayed the moment she had seen him over and over again, each time bringing with it a fresh wave of disbelief. How could he sit there, so comfortable in his new life, while she had suffered for so long? She thought of Diego and Lucia, their innocent smiles, and how she had shielded them from the harsh reality of their father's supposed death. They had grown up believing their father was a good man, tragically lost too soon. How would they react if they knew the truth? The following morning, Anna's resolve hardened. She was going to confront John. Today. She didn't care about the risk. She couldn't continue living in this limbo of unanswered questions. But she also knew she needed to be careful. Working on the cruise ship meant she was technically an employee under the passenger's service, and creating a scene could cost her the job she so desperately needed. As she prepared for the confrontation, she formulated a plan. She would approach him when he was alone, away from the prying eyes of the ship's wealthy guests and the other staff. She needed to make sure they could talk, uninterrupted, where she could finally get the truth out of him. With this plan in mind, she went through her morning shift mechanically, her mind elsewhere as she scrubbed floors and wiped down tables. She hadn't seen John yet, but she knew it was only a matter of time before their paths crossed again. Her opportunity came that afternoon. She was working in one of the quieter lounges, clearing away plates from an early lunch service when she saw him. He was alone, sitting on a plush sofa by the window, a glass of whiskey in his hand. The sun streamed through the large windows, casting a golden glow over his figure, as if nothing in the world was wrong, as if he had no idea what kind of havoc he had caused in her life. Anna's heart raced as she approached, every step heavy with the weight of the past 9 years. She couldn't back down now. She had to do this, not just for herself, but for their children. John. Her voice was steady, but she could hear the slight tremor in it as she stood in front of him. He looked up, and for a moment, his eyes flashed with recognition, followed quickly by shock. His glass froze mid-air, the whiskey sloshing slightly as he stared at her. "Anna," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. What are you doing here?" Anna couldn't help the bitter laugh that escaped her. "What am I doing here? I should be asking you that, John. Or should I say, Mr. Martinez, or whatever new name you're going by now." John's face paled. He set the glass down on the table with a shaky hand, his eyes darting around the room as if searching for an escape. But there was nowhere to run. Anna had cornered him, and there was no way out. "I thought you were dead, John," she continued, her voice growing stronger with every word. "For 9 years, I thought you were dead. And all this time, you've been living this life of luxury, while I've been back home struggling to survive. I had to raise our children on my own, with nothing but debt and grief to keep me company. You left us, John. You left us to fend for ourselves." John ran a hand through his hair, a nervous gesture she remembered well from their past life together. His eyes were wide, his mouth opening and closing as if he were trying to find the right words. But what could he possibly say to make this right? Anna, I never meant for this to happen," he finally said, his voice shaky. "I didn't know how to fix it. I was in too deep. The debt, it was too much. I thought if I left, it would give you and the kids a chance. I thought you'd be better off without me." Anna's jaw clenched, her hands balled into fists at her sides. "You thought we'd be better off without you? John, I've spent the last 9 years working 3 jobs just to put food on the table. I've had debt collectors banging on my door, threatening me and my children. I've barely slept, barely had time to even think about my own happiness because I was too busy trying to keep our family alive. And all the while, you've been sipping champagne on this damned ship." John flinched, his gaze dropping to the floor. "I didn't know it would be this bad," he muttered. I thought you'd find a way to move on." "Move on?" Anna shook her head, tears of frustration welling in her eyes. "You didn't just leave us, John. You abandoned us. You faked your death and left me with all your problems. How could you do that to your own children?" John was silent for a long moment, his hands trembling in his lap. "I was scared," he finally admitted, his voice barely audible. "I was drowning in debt, Anna. I didn't know what to do. The only way out I could see was to disappear." "Disappear?" Anna's voice cracked with anger. "You could have talked to me. We could have found a way through it together. But instead, you took the coward's way out. You let me believe you were dead. You let our children believe you were dead. Do you even know what that did to them?" John's eyes glistened with guilt as he finally looked up at her. "I never wanted to hurt you," he whispered. "I thought you'd be better off without me dragging you down." Anna felt the weight of his words, but they did nothing to soothe the years of pain she had endured. She took a step back, shaking her head. "You don't get to decide what's best for us, John. You don't get to disappear and build a new life, or we're left to pick up the pieces. You abandoned your family, and no amount of excuses will change that." John reached out, as if to touch her arm, but Anna stepped out of his reach. She didn't want his apologies or his attempts at reconciliation. What she wanted was for him to face the consequences of what he had done. "I don't know what you're doing here, John," she said, her voice cold. "But this isn't over. You're not going to get away with this. I'm going to make sure you pay for what you did. To me, to our children, to everyone you left behind." John's face fell, and for a moment, he looked like the man she had once loved, the man who had made her believe in a future filled with hope and happiness. But that man was gone, replaced by a coward who had chosen to run rather than face the mess he had created. Without another word, Anna turned and walked away, her heart heavy with the weight of what she had just done. The confrontation had been necessary, but it hadn't brought her the closure she had hoped for. If anything, it had only opened up more wounds. But as she left the lounge and made her way back to her cabin, one thing was clear: this was far from over. Unraveling the truth, Anna sat in her small, dimly lit cabin, staring blankly at the walls as the ship gently rocked against the waves. The confrontation with John had left her emotionally drained, but it had also ignited a fire within her, a fire she hadn't felt in years. He was alive. He had been alive all along. And worse than that, he had chosen to abandon her and their children. No more running, no more evading the truth. Anna was determined to uncover every lie, every secret that John had kept hidden. But as the hours passed, the raw emotions from their meeting began to cool, and Anna's mind sharpened with determination. It wasn't enough to simply know that John had faked his death. She needed to know why. Why had he done it? What had driven him to such an extreme measure? And how deep did his deception go? She thought of Diego and Lucia, how they had grown up without a father, how she had struggled to keep them afloat while he had lived in luxury. There had to be more to the story, and Anna wasn't going to rest until she had the answers. The following morning, Anna resolved to start dating. She knew she had to be careful. The cruise ship was a tightly controlled environment, and any direct attempt to confront John again might lead to unwanted attention. She couldn't risk losing her job, not with so much at stake. So she decided to take a more discreet approach, gather information quietly, piece together the truth, and find out what John had been hiding all these years. Her first step was to learn more about the woman John had been with on the ship, the one who had laughed beside him in the VIP lounge. Anna had seen her only briefly, but the memory of that moment was seared into her mind. The woman was beautiful, elegant, and clearly a part of John's new life. But who was she? And how long had she been involved in this twisted narrative? Anna knew the ship's staff had access to guest information, and while it wasn't exactly encouraged for employees to snoop around, there were ways to discreetly check the passenger list. After all, she wasn't looking to cause trouble. She just needed the truth. She had friends among the other staff members, and it didn't take long to ask a favor of one of the receptionists she had grown close to over the past few days. It was late in the evening when Anna finally got the details. The woman's name was Claudia Sinclair, a wealthy socialite who had booked a first-class suite for the duration of the cruise. Her name meant nothing to Anna at first, but the longer she stared at it, the more questions bubbled to the surface. Was Claudia aware of John's past? Did she know he had abandoned his family? Or had John spun some elaborate lie to keep her in the dark? As Anna mulled over these thoughts, she realized that Claudia wasn't just a bystander in this mess. She had to be part of the story, a key figure in whatever life John had been living since he disappeared. If Anna wanted answers, she would need to find a way to speak with Claudia. The opportunity came sooner than expected. The next day, While Anna was cleaning in one of the ship's private dining areas, she overheard two passengers discussing the evening's events. There was going to be a gala on the ship, a grand celebration for the VIP guests, complete with a live orchestra, fine dining, and dancing. It was an annual event for this particular cruise line, and it was set to be the highlight of the week. The perfect occasion for the ship's wealthiest and most prominent guests to flaunt their status. Anna knew immediately that John and Claudia would be there. It was a bold plan, risky even, but Anna couldn't let this opportunity slip away. She had to confront Claudia, and the gala would provide the perfect cover for her to blend in, unnoticed, while observing John and Claudia's interactions. She needed to see for herself how much Claudia knew and whether she could be the key to unraveling John's lies. As the sun set that evening, Anna felt her heart pounding with a mix of anticipation and fear. She had borrowed a simple black dress from one of the other maids who wasn't working that night, a plain but elegant outfit that wouldn't draw attention. Her hair, usually tied back in a bun, was now loose around her shoulders, and she had applied a hint of makeup to blend in with the crowd of elegantly dressed guests. The ship's ballroom was a sight to behold. Chandeliers sparkled above, casting a warm golden glow over the room, while couples dressed in luxurious gowns and tuxedos twirled across the dance floor. The air was thick with the scent of expensive perfume and the sound of laughter and music. Anna felt out of place, an imposter in this world of wealth and privilege. But she couldn't let that stop her. She was here for one reason: to uncover the truth. It didn't take long for her to spot them. John and Claudia were sitting at a table near the dance floor, their laughter blending with the soft murmur of the other guests. John looked every bit the part of a wealthy businessman, his arm draped casually over the back of Claudia's chair as he whispered something into her ear. Claudia, dressed in a stunning emerald green gown, smiled at him, her eyes sparkling with admiration. It was a scene out of a fairy tale, a picture of a perfect, glamorous couple. But Anna knew better. Her heart ached as she watched them, a mixture of anger and sorrow twisting inside her. This was the man she had loved. The man she had thought was dead, now living a life of opulence, while she had been left to pick up the pieces. She wanted to storm over to their table, to demand answers, to make John admit the truth in front of everyone. But she knew she had to be patient. There would be a time for confrontation. But this wasn't it. Instead, Anna kept her distance, watching them from the shadows as they laughed and danced, completely unaware of the storm brewing around them. Hours passed, and as the evening wound down, Anna finally saw her chance. John had excused himself, leaving Claudia alone at the table. This was it, the moment she had been waiting for. Anna took a deep breath and walked toward Claudia, her hands trembling slightly as she approached. Claudia looked up, her expression shifting from surprise to confusion as she saw Anna standing there. "Can I help you?" she asked, her tone polite but distant. Anna hesitated for a moment, unsure of how to begin. She had rehearsed this conversation in her mind 100 times, but now that she was standing face to face with the woman who had taken her place in John's life, the words seemed to catch in her throat. "You don't know me," Anna began, her voice steady despite the turmoil inside her. "But I know you, and I know the man you're with." Claudia's brow furrowed, her confusion deepening. "I'm sorry, but I think you've mistaken me for someone else." "No," Anna interrupted, her voice firmer now. "I haven't. You're with John Martinez, aren't you?" Claudia's eyes widened slightly at the mention of John's name. "Yes, but did he ever tell you about his past?" Anna asked, cutting her off. "About his family. About the wife and children he abandoned 9 years ago." Claudia's face paled. She opened her mouth to respond, but no words came out. Anna took a step closer, her eyes locked on Claudia's, searching for any sign of recognition or guilt. "I'm his wife," Anna said softly, the words heavy with the weight of the years she had spent in the dark. "The wife he left behind. The wife who thought he was dead." For a moment, the world seemed to stop. Claudia's expression shifted from confusion to shock, and then, finally, something like realization flickered in her eyes. "No," she whispered, shaking her head. "That can't be true. John would never." "He would," Anna said, her voice breaking with emotion. "And he did." Claudia sat back in her chair, her hand trembling as she reached for her wine glass. "I didn't know," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I didn't know." Anna stared at her, searching her face for any sign that she had been complicit in John's deception. But Claudia seemed genuinely shaken, her confident facade crumbling as the truth began to sink in. "I need to know," Anna said, her voice filled with desperation. "How long has he been living like this? Did he ever mention us? Did he ever show any remorse for what he did?" Claudia shook her head slowly, her eyes wide with disbelief. "No," she whispered. "He never. He told me he was divorced. That his wife had left him. I had no idea." Anna's heart sank. She had been prepared for anger, for confrontation, but she hadn't expected this. Claudia had been just as deceived as she had, drawn into John's web of lies without knowing the full extent of his betrayal. As the silence stretched between them, Claudia finally looked up, her eyes filled with tears. "What are you going to do?" she asked, her voice trembling. Anna took a deep breath, her mind spinning with the possibilities. She had come here for answers, and now that she had them, she realized that the next step was clear. "I'm going to make sure John faces the consequences for what he's done," she said quietly. "I've lived in the shadow of his lies for too long. It's time for the truth to come out." Facing the past, finding strength, Anna walked away from the conversation with Claudia, her mind spinning with the weight of the revelations she had just uncovered. She had expected anger, denial, maybe even confrontation, but Claudia's tearful confession had left her feeling a strange mixture of vindication and pity. Claudia had been living a lie just as much as Anna had, unknowingly drawn into the web of deceit John had spun so masterfully. It didn't excuse her role in it, but it made Anna realize that John's betrayal ran even deeper than she had imagined. The next morning, as the ship gently rocked under the warmth of the rising sun, Anna sat alone on the deck, staring out at the endless expanse of ocean. The confrontation with John still weighed heavily on her mind, but it was the conversation with Claudia that lingered the most. How could someone live with such lies? How could John have led two lives, deceiving everyone he claimed to care about, all while pretending to be someone else? Anna knew she couldn't let herself be consumed by the anger that threatened to rise inside her. She had to stay focused, had to stay strong, for herself, for Diego and Lucia. They were the reason she had endured all these years of pain, working tirelessly just to give them a semblance of a normal life. But now, with the truth out in the open, she knew she couldn't just walk away from this. John had to face the consequences of what he had done, and for the first time in a long time, Anna felt she had the power to make that happen. She spent the next few hours planning her next move. The ship would dock in 3 days, and that gave her a limited window to gather the evidence she needed to ensure John couldn't wriggle out of his responsibilities this time. She thought about contacting a lawyer, but she knew that wouldn't be enough. John had built an empire of lies, and she needed to dismantle it piece by piece. First, she had to gather information about his finances, his business dealings, anything that could expose him for who he truly was. She remembered what he had said during their confrontation about the debt he had been running from. That was the key. If she could prove he had faked his death to avoid his debts, she could use that as leverage to bring him down. But how could she get that information? It didn't take long for Anna to realize that the answer lay with the people who had helped John build his new life, his business associates, his clients, and perhaps even Claudia. If John had truly faked his death and started a new life, he must have hidden his tracks well, but not perfectly. There would be a paper trail, financial records, or perhaps even witnesses who knew more than they let on. With a newfound sense of determination, Anna decided to start with Claudia. Despite the tension between them, Claudia had seemed genuinely shaken by the truth. She had believed John's lies for years, just as Anna had, and that made her an invaluable source of information. If anyone could shed light on John's business dealings, it was her. Later that day, Anna found Claudia sitting by the pool, her sunglasses perched on the bridge of her nose, and a cocktail resting on the table beside her. The glamorous, carefree facade she had worn before was gone, replaced by an air of melancholy. Anna hesitated for a moment, unsure of how to approach, but then she reminded herself that this was no time for fear. She had to face the truth head-on, no matter how uncomfortable it might be. "Claudia," Anna said softly as she approached. Claudia looked up, her expression unreadable, but she didn't dismiss Anna's presence. "Anna," she replied, her voice flat, devoid of its former warmth. "I guess we're both stuck in this mess, huh?" Anna nodded, taking the seat across from her. "I didn't want it to be this way. I didn't want you to be dragged into this. But I need your help, Claudia. I need to know what John's been doing all these years, his business, his finances. I need to find a way to stop him." Claudia let out a long sigh, removing her sunglasses and setting them on the table. For a moment, she just stared at the ocean, her fingers tracing the rim of her glass. "I don't know how much I can help," she admitted. "I thought I knew him, but clearly I didn't. He told me his wife had left him, that he had rebuilt his life from scratch. I never questioned it." Anna leaned forward, her voice firm but calm. "I understand that, but I need whatever information you can give me. Anything. Business associates, accounts he's used, investments. There has to be something that can tie him back to the life he abandoned." Claudia looked conflicted, torn between loyalty to the man she had loved and the truth she now knew. After what felt like an eternity, she finally spoke. "He's been careful, Anna. He never uses the same name twice in his business dealings. He's built a whole network of shell companies and offshore accounts." But she hesitated, as if weighing her next words carefully. "There is one thing." Anna's heart quickened. "What is it?" Claudia leaned closer, lowering her voice. "There's a man, the business associate John's been working with for the past few years. His name is Marcus Renner. He's not exactly legitimate. He handles the more delicate parts of John's finances. I've met him a few times at business dinners. He knows everything, where the money is, how it's moved, everything. If anyone can give you the proof you need, it's him." Anna's mind raced. This was exactly what she needed. Someone with direct knowledge of John's financial dealings. Someone who could expose the tangled web of lies John had built. But it wouldn't be easy. Men like Marcus Renner didn't just hand over sensitive information. Anna would need to find a way to get to him, to convince him to talk. "How do I find him?" Anna asked, her voice steady. Claudia hesitated again, clearly uncomfortable with the direction the conversation was taking. "He lives in New York. John has a meeting with him a week after we dock. I can give you the address. But Anna, you need to be careful. Marcus is dangerous. He's not someone you can just confront." "I don't have a choice," Anna said, her resolve unwavering. "I've come this far. I'm not going to stop now." Claudia sighed, clearly conflicted, but after a moment, she reached into her purse and pulled out a small notebook. She scribbled down an address and handed it to Anna. "This is where they're meeting. But please, be careful. John might be a liar, but Marcus, he's something else." Anna took the piece of paper, her heart pounding in her chest. This was it, the lead she needed. With this information, she could finally bring John's house of cards crashing down. But Claudia was right. This wasn't going to be easy. Marcus Renner was clearly not a man to be trifled with, and Anna knew she would be walking into dangerous territory. Later that night, as Anna lay in her bunk, she couldn't help but feel the weight of everything that had happened pressing down on her. The confrontation with John, the conversation with Claudia, and now the prospect of meeting with a dangerous man like Marcus Renner. It was all overwhelming. But there was no turning back now. She had come too far, sacrificed too much, to let fear stop her. For the next 2 days, Anna focused on her work, biding her time as the ship sailed toward its final destination. Every now and then, she would catch a glimpse of John in the distance, but she avoided him, knowing that another confrontation would be pointless. She needed to focus on gathering evidence, on building a case strong enough to take him down. Finally, the day arrived. The ship docked in New York, its towering skyline greeting them as they pulled into the harbor. Anna disembarked with the rest of the staff, but her mind was already on the task ahead. She had the address Claudia had given her, and she knew she needed to move quickly. As she made her way through the bustling city streets, her nerves began to fray. What if Marcus refused to help her? What if John found out she was coming after him and disappeared again? But Anna pushed those thoughts aside. She had no choice but to push forward, to find a way to expose John for the liar and coward he was. That afternoon, Anna found herself standing outside a sleek, glass office building in the heart of Manhattan. The address Claudia had given her led her here, to one of the many faceless corporations that filled the city's financial district. Her stomach twisted with anxiety as she stared up at the imposing structure, but she took a deep breath and steeled herself. This was it, the moment she had been waiting for. With trembling hands, Anna pushed open the door and stepped inside. A dangerous game. The office building towered over Anna as she stepped inside, its cold, sterile lobby a far cry from the bustling streets outside. Everything felt too polished, too perfect, designed to project an image of success and power. But beneath that sleek exterior, Anna knew she was walking into a world filled with deceit, corruption, and danger. Marcus Renner. The name Claudia had given her echoed in her mind as she made her way toward the elevators. He was the key to everything. If she could get him to talk, she would finally have the proof she needed to expose John and bring his empire of lies crashing down. But Claudia's warning lingered as well. Marcus wasn't a man who dealt kindly with threats, and confronting him was a risk that could backfire in ways Anna wasn't fully prepared for. As she rode the elevator up to the 25th floor, her heart raced. The office directory had shown that the firm Renner was tied to operate it here, under a name that gave no hint of the shady business it conducted behind closed doors. But Anna knew this was where she would find him. When the elevator doors slid open, she stepped into a hushed reception area. Dark wood paneling, leather chairs, and soft lighting gave the space a feeling of exclusivity and power. The woman behind the reception desk glanced up at her, her perfectly groomed appearance and icy demeanor enough to make Anna feel out of place. But she didn't let it show. "Can I help you?" the receptionist asked, her voice crisp and professional. Anna hesitated for a brief moment, her mind racing to find the right words. She couldn't exactly walk in and demand to see Marcus Renner without raising suspicion. She needed to play this carefully, to slip past the barriers that stood between her and the man she needed to confront. "I'm here for an appointment with Mr. Renner," she said, keeping her voice steady. "He should be expecting me." The receptionist's eyes narrowed slightly, her fingers tapping rapidly on the keyboard as she checked the appointment log. Anna's pulse quickened. She hadn't thought this far ahead. There was no actual appointment, no legitimate reason for her to be here. If the receptionist found nothing, she could be thrown out before she even had a chance to get near Marcus. "Your name?" the receptionist asked. Anna hesitated, thinking quickly. "Claudia Sinclair," she said, hoping Claudia's name would buy her the time she needed. If Renner knew Claudia well enough, it might give her access. The receptionist's fingers stopped tapping, and she looked up at Anna with a slight frown. "Miss Sinclair, you're not on the schedule for today," she said. "But I'll check with Mr. Renner's office. Please have a seat." Anna's heart pounded as she walked over to one of the leather chairs in the waiting area. The air felt thick with tension, every second dragging on as she waited. She wasn't sure what she would do if she couldn't get in. This was her one shot, and if it fell apart, she wasn't sure how she would get another chance. After what felt like an eternity, The receptionist's phone buzzed, and she answered it with the same cool professionalism as before. A moment later, she glanced over at Anna. "Mr. Renner will see you now," she said, standing up and gesturing toward a set of double doors at the end of the hall. Relief flooded through Anna as she rose to her feet, but it was quickly replaced by a fresh wave of anxiety. She was about to walk into the lion's den. There was no turning back now. As the receptionist led her down the hall, Anna tried to steady her breathing, to focus on what she needed to accomplish. Marcus Renner was the key. If she could get him to talk, to reveal John's secrets, she could finally bring everything crashing down. But she had to play this carefully. One wrong move, and she could end up making a powerful enemy. The receptionist opened the double doors, revealing a large, opulent office. Floor-to-ceiling windows framed a breathtaking view of the Manhattan skyline, and in the center of the room sat a large mahogany desk, behind which Marcus Renner sat, his sharp, calculating eyes already fixed on her as she entered. Renner was a man in his mid-50s, with slicked-back silver hair and a face that seemed carved from stone. He exuded an air of authority and danger, the kind of man who was used to getting what he wanted. As Anna stepped inside, he didn't rise to greet her, didn't offer any sort of pleasantries. He simply watched her with a cold, assessing gaze. "Miss Sinclair," he said, his voice low and controlled. "I wasn't expecting you today." Anna's pulse quickened, but she forced herself to remain calm. She had to play along, to keep up the charade just long enough to get the information she needed. "I apologize for the unexpected visit," Anna said, stepping forward. "But there are developments I think you should be aware of. It's about John." Marcus's eyes narrowed slightly at the mention of John's name. He gestured for her to sit in one of the chairs opposite his desk, and Anna complied, her hands trembling slightly as she clasped them in her lap. Every fiber of her being was on high alert. She had to be careful, but she also had to be bold. "You have my attention," Renner said, leaning back in his chair. "What exactly has John done this time?" Anna took a deep breath, her mind racing to choose her words carefully. She couldn't reveal too much too soon, but she needed to show Renner that she was serious. "John has been less than honest," she began. "I'm sure you've known him long enough to understand that he's not always forthcoming about his past." Renner's expression remained unreadable, but there was a flicker of interest in his eyes. "Go on," he said, his voice dangerously calm. Anna hesitated for a moment before plunging forward. "He faked his death," she said quietly, watching Renner's reaction carefully. 9 years ago, he disappeared, left his family behind, and started a new life. I'm here because I need proof of his finances, of how he's been operating since then." For a moment, Renner said nothing. His gaze remained fixed on Anna, his eyes narrowing as he considered her words. The silence stretched, thick with tension, and Anna's heart pounded in her chest. Finally, Renner leaned forward, resting his elbows on the desk as he spoke. "I see. And why exactly should I help you with this situation? John is a valuable business associate. I don't get involved in personal matters unless there's something in it for me." Anna swallowed hard. She had expected this. Men like Marcus Renner didn't operate out of the goodness of their hearts. They wanted something in return, and she had to figure out what that was. "I understand," Anna said, keeping her voice steady. "But I think you'll find that John's problems are more than just personal. If he goes down, there's a chance you could be implicated as well. His financial dealings, his debts, could come back to haunt anyone connected to him." Renner's eyes darkened, and Anna knew she had struck a nerve. She pressed on, her heart racing. "I'm not asking you to betray him," she lied, knowing full well that was exactly what she was doing. "But I need access to his financial records, just enough to expose the truth about his past. You can protect your own interests while I deal with John's." The silence that followed was unbearable. Renner stared at her, his gaze piercing, as if he were trying to decide whether she was worth the trouble. Anna could feel the sweat forming on the back of her neck, But she didn't let her fear show. She had to stand her ground. Finally, Renner let out a low chuckle, though there was no warmth in it. "You're a bold woman, Miss Sinclair, or whoever you really are. But I admire your nerve. John's been sloppy lately. I'll admit that. And if you're right about his past coming back to bite him, I don't want to be caught in the crossfire." Anna exhaled slowly, barely daring to believe that he was taking the bait. "I'll give you what you need," Renner said, his voice cold. "But understand this. You're on your own. If this blows up, I won't lift a finger to help you. And if you come back to me with more demands, you won't like what happens next." Anna nodded, her throat dry. "I understand." Renner stood, walking to a locked cabinet on the far wall. He pulled out a small black binder, setting it on the desk in front of her. "This is what you're after," he said. "It's all there: offshore accounts, shell companies, everything John's used to hide his money. But you better make sure you know what you're doing. Once you expose him, there's no going back." Anna stared at the binder, her heart pounding in her chest. This was it, the proof she needed to bring John's world crashing down. But as she reached out to take it, a chill ran down her spine. Renner's words hung in the air like a warning, a reminder that the game she was playing was dangerous, and that she was now in far deeper than she had ever anticipated. She had the evidence. Now she just had to decide what to do with it. The final reckoning. Anna stood in the cold, sterile office, the weight of the black binder in her hands feeling almost too heavy to bear. It was everything she had fought for. Years of pain, struggle, and unanswered questions now condensed into a single book of truths. Her hands trembled as she held it, the enormity of what she was about to do sinking in. This was no longer just about John or the lies he had told her. This was about justice, about reclaiming the life he had stolen from her and their children. But it was also about something far more dangerous. The moment she opened this binder, her life would change forever. She glanced at Marcus Renner, who stood by his desk with an unreadable expression on his face. His earlier warning still echoed in her mind. Once you expose him, there's no going back. Anna knew that to be true. What she was holding wasn't just a collection of financial records. It was the key to unraveling everything John had built. His businesses, his fake identity, his escape from the life he had left behind. If she used this, there would be no hiding, no running, no more secrets. The ride back to her hotel felt surreal. The binder was tucked safely in her bag, but her mind was racing. As the taxi wound through the busy streets of Manhattan, Anna thought about the weight of the decision she was about to make. She had the power now. John had always controlled the narrative, always dictated the terms of her life, leaving her with nothing but debt, heartbreak, and the burden of raising their children alone. But that was over. Now she held all the cards. Yet the question remained, how far was she willing to go? By the time she returned to her hotel room, the sun was beginning to set, casting a golden glow over the city skyline. Anna sank into the worn armchair by the window, her mind reeling. She opened the binder slowly, the soft creak of the spine the only sound in the quiet room. Inside were pages of documents, bank records, wire transfers, and offshore accounts, all meticulously detailing the financial web John had spun over the past 9 years. Each page was a testament to his deception, each entry a reminder of how far he had gone to hide the truth from her. It wasn't just about the money. John had lived a lie, an entire life built on the ashes of their family. And for what? To escape his debts. To live in luxury while she struggled to feed their children. As Anna flipped through the pages, her anger grew. She thought of Diego and Lucia, how they had spent their childhoods without a father, how she had shielded them from the pain of his supposed death, how she had worked herself to the bone just to provide for them. And all this time, John had been living like a king. The anger burned hotter, and Anna knew she couldn't let him get away with it. But she also knew that exposing John wasn't just about revenge. It was about protecting her children's future. John's lies had put them in danger, financially, emotionally, and now, possibly even physically. She couldn't let that continue. She reached for her phone, her fingers hovering over the screen as she considered her options. She could go to the police, bring the full force of the law down on John, and let them deal with the consequences. Or she could contact the media, expose his deception publicly, and ruin him in a way that would ensure he could never rebuild his life. Both options carried risks, but Anna knew one thing for certain. John would fight back. He wouldn't go down without a fight, and there was no telling how far he would go to protect himself. Before she could make her decision, her phone buzzed, pulling her out of her thoughts. It was a message from an unknown number. "We need to talk. Don't do anything rash." Anna's heart raced as she stared at the message. Who was this? Was it John? Had he somehow found out what she was planning? Or was it Marcus, trying to exert control over the situation now that he had given her the evidence? A chill ran down her spine as the implications sank in. She was no longer just dealing with John. She had stepped into a world far more dangerous than she had anticipated. And now it seemed like she was being watched. Another message appeared almost immediately after. "Meet me tonight, 9 p.m. at the corner of 34th and Lexington. Alone." Anna's pulse quickened. Her mind raced with possibilities, but she knew there was no backing out now. She had come too far to be intimidated into silence. She would go to the meeting, but she wouldn't be unprepared. She couldn't afford to be. The hours leading up to the meeting felt like a blur. Anna couldn't eat, couldn't rest, and couldn't focus on anything other than the looming confrontation. She replayed every conversation with John in her head, every lie he had told, and every choice she had made to get to this point. Now it all came down to this. At 8:45 p.m., she slipped out of her hotel and made her way to the rendezvous point. The streets of New York were still alive with the usual chaos of the city, but Anna felt strangely isolated, as if she were the only person in the world walking toward a destiny she couldn't control. Her heart pounded with every step, her mind racing with what awaited her at 34th and Lexington. When she arrived, the corner was quieter than she had expected. The streetlights cast long shadows across the sidewalk, and the sounds of the city seemed distant, muted. She scanned the area, her nerves on edge, waiting for whoever had sent the message to reveal themselves. Moments later, the black sedan pulled up to the curb. The windows were tinted, and Anna's stomach twisted with anxiety as the back door slowly opened. "Get in," a familiar voice called from inside. Anna froze, her body tensing as she realized who it was. John. For a moment, she considered turning and walking away, but something inside her stopped her. She had come this far, and she wasn't going to back down now. With a deep breath, she stepped forward and climbed into the car. The door shut behind her, sealing her in the cold, tense silence of the vehicle. John sat across from her, his face illuminated by the faint glow of the streetlights outside. He looked different, older, wearier, but there was still that same sharpness in his eyes, the same arrogance she had come to despise. "We need to talk," he said, his voice calm but firm. Anna's heart raced as she stared at him, the binder still clutched in her hands. "Talk about what, John? About how you faked your death and left me and your children to fend for ourselves? Or about how you've been living like a king while we struggle to survive?" John's jaw clenched, but he didn't respond immediately. Instead, he leaned back in his seat, his eyes narrowing as he regarded her carefully. "I know you've got the records," he said quietly. "Marcus gave them to you, didn't he?" Anna's grip tightened on the binder. "Yes, he did. And I'm going to use them to expose you." For a moment, John said nothing. The tension in the car was thick, suffocating. Finally, he spoke, his voice lower, more measured. "You don't know what you're getting into, Anna. If you go public with that information, it won't just ruin me. It will bring down a lot of dangerous people. People who won't hesitate to come after you and the kids." Anna's blood ran cold, but she refused to let the fear show. "I'm not afraid of you, John. Not anymore." John's eyes darkened, and he leaned forward, his voice dropping to a near whisper. "You should be. This isn't a game, Anna. You have no idea how deep this goes. I didn't fake my death because I wanted to. I did it because I had no choice. The people I owed money to weren't going to let me live. I had to disappear, and now you're threatening to bring it all back." Anna's mind raced as she processed his words. Was this just another lie, another manipulation to keep her silent? Or was there a kernel of truth buried in his warning? She had seen the records, seen the web of offshore accounts and shady business dealings. There were undoubtedly powerful people connected to John, people who wouldn't want their secrets exposed. But Anna wasn't going to back down. Not now. "You made your choices, John," she said, her voice steady despite the fear gnawing at her. "And now you have to live with the consequences. You left me and our children behind. You faked your death, and you lied to everyone. I'm done playing by your rules. I'm going public with this." John's face twisted with frustration, but before he could respond, Anna opened the door and stepped out of the car, her heart racing. She didn't wait for his reply. She didn't need to hear any more lies. As she walked away, the weight of her decision pressed down on her, but she knew it was the right one. There was no turning back now. She would go to the authorities. She would expose John and everything he had done. It was time for him to face the reckoning he had long avoided. The next morning, Anna stood outside the Manhattan District Attorney's office, the binder of evidence in her hands. The sun was just beginning to rise, casting a soft glow over the city. She took a deep breath and walked through the doors, ready to bring her nightmare to an end. Epilogue. Months later, John Martinez's crimes were exposed in a high-profile investigation. The media coverage was relentless, detailing his fraudulent business dealings, his fake death, and the years of lies he had built around himself. John was arrested, along with several of his business associates, and faced charges that would ensure he would never escape justice. For Anna, life slowly began to return to a new normal. She had fought for years to protect her children, to shield them from the truth. But now that the truth was out, they had a chance to start fresh. Diego and Lucia would grow up knowing their mother had fought for them, had never given up, no matter how impossible things had seemed. And as for Anna, she finally felt free. Free from John's lies, free from the debt that had once crushed her, and free to build a new life on her own terms. The future was still uncertain, but one thing was clear. Anna had won.